Well, our guest is the head of one of the largest community foundations in the United States. But I don't think it's the size of it that really distinguishes either the job or her. Antonia started, I think, in Washington, with one of the the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary, where she was counsel to it, and worked there, and then obviously made such a reputation that she was asked to become the head of MALDEF, the nonprofit that was started by the Ford Foundation, Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, and which is the leading organization in that field among those organizations. And she served in that role, I'm not sure how many years. We were in the 10 years?
I was there 23 years.
There 23 years as head of MALDEF, and then was drafted to be the head of the Community Foundation of Los Angeles, which, as I said, is one of the largest in the country. But you know, it's not, I have to say that Damon and I were talking with Antonia earlier before we came in, and I learned more things about the way she has to go about doing her business that will be absolutely fascinating, I think, to tell you a little bit about. But I'll let her tell you. But I just give you, you know, she not only has to figure out how to spend the money that they get, she also has to figure out how to raise it. But what she tells me is her secret is just be nice and people will come to you, essentially. Just to start off, she's most recently, one of her tasks was to sell two large houses in Los Angeles given to the foundation as general purpose grants by Mackenzie Scott. That's just one, she ends up having to deal with real estate and just everything he has to be able to do. And we've got a number of items to talk about, but you know, I think you think about someone as being head of the community foundation. I don't know whether you have to sell any houses. Do you have to sell houses? There you go. It's more occasioning happening that I knew about. In any event, so we're going to have this discussion here, and I'm going to ask a few questions, and we're going to go from there and talk about not just anything you want to talk about that builds on the kinds of questions that Antonia talks about. So my first question is, as a civil rights lawyer, what made you leave MALDEF and take a job in philanthropy?
A lot of people ask me that question. And, you know, it's interesting. I've been at CCF for 19 years, and I still identify as a civil rights lawyer because that's who I am. And, you know, when I was approached to take the job, I asked, why in the heck do you want a troublemaking civil rights lawyer to run CCF? Because at that time, the California Community Foundation was a very small, sleepy foundation. You know, let me tell you a little bit about CCF. We, as a community foundation, we are a place-based institution. My little piece of dirt is LA County. 10 million people, 87 cities, 81 school districts, larger than 14 states. And when I inherited CCF, it had all but $550 million, most of it donor directed. So I told the person who hired me, you sold me a bill of goods. But the reason I went, and it goes back to why I became a civil rights lawyer. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. I came to the United States when I was a child. I'm a product of LAUSD education, and I went to UCLA. I didn't know a single lawyer when I started law school. I started law school when most of you young people weren't born. I started law school in 1971. There were very few people that looked like me. I didn't know a single lawyer or what they did, but I knew that being a lawyer, you can change the laws. And my interest has always been improving the quality of life of Latinos, immigrants, and poor people. That has been my, so I saw the law as a vehicle for change. That's what it was for me. I wanted to change the laws. Well, CCF for me was another vehicle. At MALDEF, when I was at the Senate, I was writing bills, and working, changing the laws, making the laws. I left to MALDEF to influence the law and to interpret the law through the law. And I used litigation and education as my vehicle for change. When I was approached for CCF, I said, well, now the vehicle for change is going to be money. And I didn't have that much money. But it's money. I mean, to me, CCF is a vehicle to improve the quality of life in LA County, and we focus on the poor and the vulnerable, and we make no bones about it. That's our focus. So, I thought, okay, here I am, now it's CCF. You have to be nice to everybody, which is not my nature. You have to be diplomatic, which is not my nature either. I'm pretty blunt and direct. And so I had to sort of kind of adjust. And I thought, donor directed, what the heck is that? It's my money, but it's not really my money. It's CCF's money, but it's not really CCF's money. Because all we do is we implement the will of the donors. And I thought, well, what the heck is that? So I had a lot of learning to do, and I said, okay, what do I want to do with this vehicle? And if you're in the community foundation field, when I entered, it's changed a little bit now. It was this obsession with raising money. Money, money, money. But raising money that you did not control. So to me, it was like, well, no, that's not what I want. I want to control the money. I want to be able to send it to, where the need is in LA. And so I started creating a strategy, went to my board, and I said, most foundations, and I am critical of foundations, philanthropy is very voguish. They have 5-year plans. First year, they're trying to figure out what the plan is. Then they spend 2 years trying to implement the plan. Then they get bored by the plan. And the last 2 years of the 5 years, they're thinking about what they're going to do next. Well, I've been in the business of social change, and I know that it's hard. 2 steps forward, 1 back. It's slow. Real change is slow and incremental. And you have to have a long-term focus and be persistent. So I went to my board and I said, I want a 10-year plan. And they go, 10 years? I said, 10 years. And I said, and the focus is going to be raising money and serving donors. I love my donors, but I want to raise discretionary money, and I want donors who are aligned with the needs of LA County. Donors who want to invest in LA County. Donors who understands the challenges of LA County. And I call it my imperfect paradise. I've lived in DC, I travel the world. There's no place like LA. It's messy, it's ambiguous, but you know what? It's the world. And if we can make it in LA, which, we have our troubles making it in LA, it is the future of living in a multicultural society. Because America is perceived as a black-white world. That's the way the history is, the way it's been interpreted, but it's not the way it was. And LA is the future of the United States. And so I work very hard to focus on that. So basically, I've been obsessed about raising discretionary money. I've been very focused on where that money's going to go. Housing, education, health, immigration, and I'm missing one, okay? But those are the 5 priorities. And I think that, I've been very fortunate. I'm not the biggest, but I'm the one that has the most discretionary money. And that's the key. Because if you want to make a difference, you have to have the control of where the money's going. Because if you don't have control, you're being effective. I'm not going to minimize that, but it's a lot harder to influence. I have over 400 donors with interests that, cross the political landscape. It's all over the place. And I want to serve them. And I work very hard to serve them. But they also have to serve the interest of Los Angeles.
You said that you started when you came there 19 years ago, something like that?
19 years ago.
The foundation had $50 million.
540.
$540
million.
Right. And what is it now?
Well, depending on the market. I think we did good today, but basically I have between $2 billion and $400 and $600 million. But this is the big one. About 45% is donor and over 40% is discretionary. Okay?
Yeah.
It is discretionary, and that's the beauty of it. And I was telling Joel last year, my fiscal year is from July 1st to June 30th. So right now I'm right in the middle. And for community foundations, we raise about 50% of our money between November and December. We give out that much money. So to give you an example, CCF is a money machine. Last fiscal year, we raised over $380 million, and we gave out $437 million. Can you imagine just the flow of money going, like right now, it's busy giving money, because that's when most of our donors give our money, okay? So it's an infrastructure where you have to be lean, mean machine, an effective machine, and be quick about it. So I'm very proud of the fact that over 40% of our total funds are discretionary funds, which means that through my board, my staff, we give that much money out into the community, and we measure every penny where it goes. Over 50% of the total funds given out last year stayed in LA County. Because, we're very focused on making sure that we have an impact in our community.
So do you have any sense of what the ratio is for other community foundations between the discretionary and the mandatory? My sense is that it ranges very widely. You think about the Oklahoma, I think it's Oklahoma that had over 90% of its money in donor-advised funds that were restricted. My impression from conversations with Paul Grogan, who was the head of the Boston Foundation, that it was more like yours. It was more like 50-50. And I guess the other foundations, I don't know where you are.
The older the community foundation, I think the more discretionary historically. And then I think with the the work you've done to specifically build the discretionary, but like for us, it's about 15% of our assets.
Right. Well, I think that, take one specific instance that I know about, the Joan Pilevsky gift, for example. Joan Pilevsky was the widow of a figure. She was a remarkable woman, but she was also the widow of a successful person in the theater business, if I remember correctly.
He actually, Max Pilevsky was the precursor to Xerox, and the technology made a lot of money, and then went into a lot of different businesses when he sold the company. But Joni, let me tell you, Joni was a character. And this is the interesting thing about community foundations. People have the illusion that you know where the money's coming from. You never know where the money's coming from. Joni was this political activist woman. If you were in politics, and Joni had been alive, she probably would supported your daughter, because she supported every woman running for office in the United States while she was alive. Okay, that's Joni. And she also gave money to MALDEF, where I was, to the ACLU, MALDE, all those organizations she gave money to. And I knew her, and she was a curmudgeon, okay? A frugal curmudgeon. And she would say that she made her money the old-fashioned way. She was the first wife of Max. Max had 7 wives. And she said, I made it the old-fashioned way. But she never really thought that it was her money. And she had only given one gift to CCF. One gift of $1,000 when the LA Public Library burned, and we had a fund for that. Never given a penny to CCF other than that one, grant. And it was April of 2006. I had been at CCF for just about 2 years. And I am a Catholic, a practicing Catholic, and it was Good Friday, and I told my staff that I was going to Mass, and I'm at church, and the phone keeps ringing. And my staff knows not to disturb me when I'm in church, okay? And it keeps ringing, so I answer the damn phone, and I said, it better be good. And he says, it's better than good. We have just been left $257 million. It was the residual of Joan's estate. That was the foundation for me to do what I've done. Joni was the one. I had no idea, and it was the residual. Prior to, she gave to half the world, okay? And we got the leftover. So you never know where the money's coming from. And I can tell you story after story about that. Her house, very modest, we sold that. She had no assets. I mean, we went to the house and hadn't been renovated since the 50s. Okay, there was nothing there but $257 million. And so if you do good work, and let me tell you, where did she get that influence? Her lawyer, her wealth agent. Okay, we raise all this money. We don't raise it like, nonprofits. It's all through estate lawyers, trust lawyers, business, wealth advisors. That's our world. That's a whole different world in which how we raise money. And it was Stan Schneider, who is very well known in LA as, has a lot of big name, wealthy individuals, who put us as the residual. That was it. And then the lawyer, Stuart Tobitson and some others from the firm. That's how we got the money. And that's what changed the direction of CCF. Okay, it's gifts like that allow you to really think strategically. Because philanthropy is venture capital. If you really think about it, and you have worked in government now, most of the money, 90% plus of the money to help poor people comes from government. Okay? So how we leverage that small amount of money, that 10% maybe, that philanthropy has, even Ford, Gates, what's his face who just gave me money? It's Scott, Mackenzie Scott's husband, Max, whatever his face is, okay? Exactly, that's the one, Jeff Bezos, okay? They have all this wealth, but it doesn't compare to the funds that we, the taxpayers, put into to assist those in need. Most of that money comes from the government. So you have to be strategic. You have to be very thoughtful of how you're going to use those funds in order to really make a difference.
As I remember what you told me when we talked about this a couple of years ago, you used Joan Palevsky's gift, basically, all of it, I think, for discretionary.
Yes.
It was totally unspecified.
Totally.
And that really, in a sense, got your discretionary accounts going.
Yes. It did. But then, it's like everything else. If you're in if you're in community foundations, because family foundations are very different and private foundations are very different.
Yeah.
I served on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation for 10 years, so I'm somewhat familiar with national philanthropy. And at MALDEF, we didn't take government money. I had to raise all the revenue from the private sector. So you named the foundation, I knew where they were. You named the corporate headquarters, and I knew where they were, okay, because that's where I raised the money. But I don't think I would be enticed to work at a private foundation. Too bureaucratic, too static, too whatever. And so, to me, community foundations are the perfect vehicle if you really want to make a change and be involved. And I tell my staff, and this is what I also said, because you have to change the culture. I had to totally change the culture of CCF. And I said, we're more than grant makers. We're conveners. We're civic leaders. Money's not the only way you influence change. And so all my staff know, and I said to my staff, we're all fundraisers, okay? We're all communicators, okay? Because you don't get into these little silos where, this is my little portfolio. Well, number one, it's not your portfolio, okay? And it's not your money, because people get very attached. I could say, well, I'm very wealthy, I have 2 billion, whatever. It's not my money, So I think you really have to have a sense, a fiduciary sense, and a real responsibility to use those funds as effectively as you can. And I'm like Joan, I'm extraordinarily frugal. I'm very cheap, okay? My staff, I think you flew from LA, when I got hired, and I got to tell you this funny story. Okay, I got hired, but and if you're from LA, and I'm sure here in North Carolina, there's these private clubs. And up to 20 years ago, they didn't accept Jews, and women, and blacks. That was the fact. The California was one of them. California Club. In LA, there's now 2 main ones. There used to be a lot. So when I was in MALDEF, I opposed their renewal of their license because they weren't, being inclusive. And then I joined CCF, and they tell me that I have to become a member. And I go, I beg your pardon? And they say to me, well, where do you think you're going to meet your donors? And I go, oh, yeah, I'm in a different world. So I had to join the California Club, okay, because that's where my old donors, gathered together. That's where we had lunch. That's where we had breakfast. That's where you discuss business. So I told myself, I have just joined a whole different world. It's always been there. It's not that I was not aware of it. I was just not part of it. And now, to be successful.
You changed the policy? When
Yes,
you went?
hell yeah. And now it's a very inclusive club, and it's very successful. The 2 that are left are somewhat successful because they're inclusive. But you talk to, like former Secretary of State Warren Christopher was one of the leaders in opening it up. A friend, John Bryson, former Commerce Secretary. They were the people that were influential in opening those private clubs that are now very inclusive and very successful. But just goes to show you, it's been an interesting experience for me, sort of to be on that side of the table.
How does that experience differ from your experience?
Oh, gosh. Well, we're much
much smaller, and we're much younger. Not me personally, but the foundation. All the things that Antonia is saying are things, sorry, and this is her interview, not mine. All of the things that you're saying are things that we talk about all the time. And in fact, one of the questions I was going to ask you was, in this whole like power shift and making philanthropy more democratic, but recognizing you still need the high net worth, and it's that constant tension between where you balance the donor work and the community work. But you're so right. Our gift was $6 million, not $257 million, and it was only 8 years ago. But similarly, thinking about, okay, now how do we start to deploy that to build more, to have more influence? And just yesterday we were talking about, we don't need a short-term 5-year, 3-year. We need a long-term 10-year plan with 1-year rechecks. Right. So, I mean, it's like I'm like, oh my God, she understands everything I have to go through, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's true. And you know, the other thing that's really interesting, and there is, I would say that I don't feel the tension as much anymore. And I was telling Joel, I'll tell you a couple of interesting stories. Right soon after I got there, I had a delegation of 4 elderly donors who I knew very well, because I called them the Catholic Mafia. And being a Catholic, of course, I knew all this Catholic Mafia, you know, because they're civic leaders in the community. But they came to me and say, Antonia, he goes, we're concerned. And I said, about what? He says, well, we know you're pro-choice. I said, well, it's no secret. And he says, well, how can, we be assured? And I said, look, you guys. I said, you're donors. And by that time, I had a sense of what I had and didn't have. I said, you're a donor, and you're free to give your money to the pro-life causes. I said, and I have donors who support Planned Parenthood. What I pledge to you is that I will fully adhere to your desires and your wishes. At CCF, if you're a 501c3 nonprofit and you're legit within the IRS, it's your choice. I can talk to you about it, but it's your choice. I said, that I can guarantee you. It appeased them. Of the 4, 1 has left. Okay, the other 3 are still hanging around. That was one visit. And the other visit was also the same thing. Well, you're not going to turn CCF into a troublemaking organization. And I said, well, if I can, I will. And the point I'm trying, and I said it nicely, okay, not as, my point is, you have to project who you are and who your values is. Being in philanthropy is a value-based thing. You are giving to your values. You are giving to what you believe in, what your passions are about. And, it goes the whole gamut. And, you talk about donors and the conflict. Actually, I'm developing a new line of business, which is really interesting, and I have 2 now, big time. I have a donor that is an $80 million donor, okay? He has no interest in starting a foundation. It's a pain in the tushy, okay? So he came to me and said, Antonia, I'll pay if you hire someone to serve me. And I said, okay, but let's talk about how we do that. So this is the 2nd year in which I hire a CCF employee who works at CCF under CCF rules and all the same, and is 50% serving him, because I said not fully. I still have to control, okay? And now he said, but I need another person. And he's planning to retire. And he goes, and I want an office. I said, sure, and I'm going to put him really close to mine, because my crazy staff, I don't know what they're going to do. okay? But yeah, and so now that's full. I have another $40 million donor who says the same thing. They're passionate about early childhood education. And we've been focused on early childhood education. So this program officer, 50% is CCF, 50% is the donor. And now more and more high-end donors are evaluating the headache of either starting a private foundation or going to a community foundation and partnering. And that's what I say to these. Partner with us, particularly on the issues that we're already focused on, and they come to us for the expertise. I have the best program officers, and I do not hire from philanthropy. I hire from community. It's easier to train someone into philanthropy than to train someone to understand community. Okay? So all of my program officers come from nonprofits or from the community running something or being a program officer. And I have the best. And people know that they can come, and if our program officers are working on there, they know what's happening on the street. And that's what I tell them. Don't complain about the fees, okay? Because if you're worried about fees, go to Fidelity, go to Schwab. But if you care about being impactful and learning about LA, that's us. And I don't charge you enough for that, okay? So don't complain to me about fees. And I never, people at the beginning were worried about Fidelity and Schwab. I said, I don't compete with them. I offer an entirely different product. And I tell people who come in onto my board, when your term ends at CCF, it's the equivalent of getting a PhD on Los Angeles, because you will know LA. You will know the 87 cities, you will know the communities, and you will know the good nonprofits. So and I think we have to be confident about what you offer and make no apologies for it. We got some money from the government to pass through during the pandemic, and now the county wants to partner with us. And I tell my staff, no, it has to align. And in fact, right now I'm haggling with the County of LA. It's a 7-year contract. It's a $17 million contract. But I'm saying no, unless you change certain rules. Because I'm not going to give you data and information on the clients we serve. So, being firm about what you deliver, about your services and what you believe in, allows you to create meaningful relationships that are solid. And, it's sort of, after 19 years, I'm pretty comfortable in what we do at CCF. And I have the type of staff that, like I said, I'm very proud of. So I could change, but you have to give me a reason for changing.
Those of you who follow foundations know that the community foundations have been sort of in the process of change for quite some time. The old line for community foundations were much more shied away from dealing with major public problems in the cities in which they worked. I think largely, but you, of course, you started focusing on the problems of Los Angeles. So you didn't really go through that phase, basically. You started where many of the others are getting, or trying to get to. When I talked to Paul Grogan, I knew about the Boston Foundation before he went there, but he really came there and transformed the foundation and decided we're going to tackle major public policy problems. It's not what this foundation has done before, but we think that that's what we should be doing. And there's been a movement basically created. Basically, I think Paul was one of the leaders of it, but what Antonia did was really there already on the map about the kinds of ways of dealing with public policy problems. And I don't know, I've not really studied what the Triangle Community Foundation is doing on that question. Say a word about, do you have a view on that change that's going on among foundations, and where would you place the Triangle Community Foundation?
In terms of focusing on issues here in the
Controversial public issues.
I think it depends on the municipality, and I think it depends on how the region is served, because we serve a 4-county region, and our municipalities are very different. I'm sure, like your counties and your districts and cities are very different. I don't know that we've tackled controversial. We've tackled things of interest in the region. I think we have leaned and tried to influence around making a difference in this region on some of these issues. But like Antonia was sharing about the Catholic Mafia, it's in their minds, it's their money. And so having to serve those donors that might be antithetical to what you're trying to change in the community is where the challenge is.
Right.
Well, at CCF, I created a whole department. It's called Civic Engagement. And we give to voter registration, community organizing. I have a full set of staff that's all they do. And that was the other thing. At this last election, we must have probably over $1 million on voter registration and community organizing and get out the vote. We don't tell people how to vote, okay? It's just get out. And working with, communities, who have not been engaged in the political process and have not had a voice. So, and I was very clear, I created a department exclusively for that. And of course, that's where the discretionary money comes in, Joel, the ability to do that. And we get engaged in supporting and opposing bills. We work, at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, cities level, because, it's the philosophy, and I tell people, look, someone comes to you and say they're hungry. You feed them once, and you have to feed them again. The question is, why are they hungry? Actually, we're going to next week issue out, there's a press conference, a report. We have worked with the county so that when people come into contact to the county, it's called puertas or windows or doors or whatever interaction they have with the county at whatever level, sign them up for food stamps, okay? They don't have to go to a special, it's like, whatever interaction you have with that, they're gonna be signed up for food stamps. Because once they get food stamps, then you know that they have bread for every day. And so we always go to the root of the problem. I always ask, okay, what's the root of the problem? Let's get at the root of the problem, and let's try to solve, because that's the way you're gonna leverage your resources. And we do that for every issue. We're very involved, in at the education with the superintendents, at the state level, at the local level. I think, that, and I don't see them as controversial. Even when I talk to my most conservative donors, people know where my life is and where my views are, but I never talk politics. I talk compassion. I talk empathy. I talk about the fact that most human beings want to help other human beings. And that's what I do the guilt trip, okay? And it works very well, let me tell you, okay? But I do it, so these are not partisan issues. And we don't need to go there as a community. And even the most controversial issues, you give it to me, and I say, well, I don't see that as controversial. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you see this as a controversial issue. Hunger is not controversial. A good education should not be controversial. Healthcare for all should not be controversial. So I think we need to think about how we communicate. And it's not about my views, my personal views, and what I do or I not do. It's about helping people who need help. And if we focus on that and our common humanity, because that's what we're dealing with, our common humanity, and the fact that if LA, we have a terrible homeless problem, absolutely embarrassing for a first world country. And you go to LA and what's the thing? We got to deal with it. And I anger my civil rights lawyers when I say some people cannot take care of themselves. And we have to take care of them in a humane way, but they can't take care of themselves. Okay? So so you have to be able to tackle the issues in an honest way. And there's no lefty way and no right way. It's the right way, the way that's going to solve the problem. And I think that that's what has allowed me. And also because I live in the Republic of California and in the Republic of the County of LA.
Well, I think I'll go on with questions, but this is a point at which I usually ask the group to come up with your own questions. And perhaps some of the things that Antonia has said will raise a question in your minds. And already doing it in your mind, so please go ahead.
Yeah. So this is so energizing. This was so energizing and makes me proud to be an Angelino and grateful that you're running the philanthropy there. What I really appreciated what you're talking about is like the deep expertise of knowing the community and really thinking about how to do the work. What do you think these the ultra high net worths who are going to start putting big checks out the door, how could they leverage, or do you see them potentially leveraging the infrastructure and knowledge of community foundations to make thoughtful local investments?
Well, I'm a matchmaker, okay? I match. I'll give you a couple of examples because they're hilarious. We have a large portfolio on housing, and we actually have about $60 million in program-related investments. And about 40 million are, we give grants and loans to nonprofit developers. And I just put aside another $20 million for private developers building low-income housing. And so we really know the field really well and who those developers are because we fund them and we work with them. And so from time to time, donors come in and say they're interested in housing. And so what do? We introduce the donor to the director of, one of the nonprofits. So we got a call from one of our anonymous donors saying that this person was very interested in visiting one of the nonprofit developers, okay? And usually the directors, the heads of these nonprofits, we call them dog and pony shows. Oh, I got to do another dog and pony show, the donors coming by. And so, my program officer who heads the program, takes the donor, they visit it. You never know what the donor's going to say or do, right? So the donor does his thing, half an hour. He's very busy making money. He leaves. So he calls our office and he says, would you transfer this amount of money, to the nonprofit? And so we said, okay, how much do you want to transfer? And usually it's 10 million, 5 million, 20 is a really big, thing. And he says, no, I'm not 25, no, $3 million. And so we called the director, and she goes, I almost peed in my pants. I couldn't believe it. $3 million, just like that. We take our donors to get to know the nonprofits. And we say to our donor, now that you have a relationship with this nonprofit, you don't have to come through us. It's your relationship. You get involved, be there, go there. So we're the matchmakers. And you know, the more our donors get to know the grantees, and the other thing too is they leave their gated estates and go into the poorest neighborhoods in LA. They get to know the beauty of LA, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're constantly, and the more we put donors and connect them to nonprofit organizations, I would say the vast majority of the times they become very good supporters of that nonprofit and they stay with it. The other way we measure is we measure where there's aligned giving, which means that the giving aligns with our priorities, and we also measure what we call parallel giving, where they're giving to the same nonprofits that we give to. So we keep very close tabs of where that money is going to. And as I said, most of my program officers are constantly doing this matchmaking because they're the experts. You know, not me, what do I know? I know the generalities, but if I put my experts on it, they're the ones that are going to impress the donors. So in many ways, that's the way we have expanded the tentacles of CCF, because we're bringing the donors to the nonprofit leaders, and that's where the relationship is.
I have a question. Thank you so much, Antonia, for your powerful talk. It's still very impressive, like you have such a large discretionary pool. I would like to know more. What's your strategy to convince or educate your donors or trustees to keep such a large pool of discretionary budget? Like, say, if you have a very controlling trustee or donor who wants to like only put money in the project budget, project funding, how do you convince them?
Actually, you know, there's this old saying, and I truly believe it, for board members, okay, it's nose in, fingers out. Okay. What does that mean? I love my boards, and I have fantastic board members, and I truly respect their role. Governance is very important. Transparency is very important. The fiduciary financial responsibilities, we're very transparent. If you go into us, you can see everything. There are no secrets at CCF. I report to them on everything, and I have a philosophy that I learned at MALDEF, okay? They get 3 bites of the apple. I never surprise my board members, okay? Because I learned it, you know, at MALDEF, I had a national board, and I was suing throughout the country. And I sue in Texas, and my board member from Texas calls me and goes, I just got a call from so-and-so. What the hell are you doing? And I said, oh, bananas. I didn't do my homework. So when I'm thinking of doing something, first bite of the apple. This is what I'm thinking about. This is why, you know, whatever. They're fully brief. I get their input. Next bite of the apple is, I, you know, incorporated your input. Here's it is. And the third bite of the apple, vote on it. Okay, but you never surprise your donors, you never surprise your partners. Okay, so you respect their role. But if they start interfering, that's what you pay me all that beautiful money for. Me, come to me, okay? Me, and I tell my staff, because see, the staff, interestingly enough, is fascinated with this thing about the board. They want to get to know the board. They want to be friends with the board, okay? And I tell them, that's okay, but remember, I'm your barrier that keeps you from the meddling of the board, okay? The freedom that you have to do your job is because I keep that line. I say, you start, and I tell them, you start messing with my board, I cut you at the knees and you won't even know what hit you.
Those of you who are watching with Zoom, feel free to send questions in.
We have a question from Debbie Bussell from Bussell Philanthropies.
So she had mentioned that several FIRG presenters have pointed to the network of community foundations as the infrastructure through which solutions to challenging societal problems can be addressed. many have their eyes on community foundations. For example, she has heard the idea of supporting local investigative journalism through community foundations and saving democracy through community foundations and addressing climate change, etc. Do you see the community foundation as this infrastructure? How would you discern which issues to take on, and what role is best for community foundations to fill in addressing these big cube issues?
That is, to me, has been the biggest challenge because there are so many needs. And so you really, at the beginning, I did not have a choice as to what the direction of the foundation would be, because I had to pull all of these donors together that had similar interest. And so I was just coupling together with the resources that I had. Now that I have more resources, now I'm able to discern. And one of the things you talked about is something that is in the back of my mind that we don't currently focus on, but I think it's really important. And that is the news media and facts and information. And it really, I'm beginning to think about it and trying to figure out, because I think now, I believe that newspapers should be nonprofits. I believe that we have to have institutions whose role is to tell the public facts. And we don't have that anymore. Think about from a newspaper perspective. I get the New York Times, on my desk, okay? I went and bought it this morning. It's $3.50 for the New York Times, and it's $5.50 for the Wall Street Journal. And those are the major newspapers in this country now. I used to be proud of the LA Times. I can read that while I'm eating my cereal. There's not much there. So, our opinions are formed when we are given facts. And right now, we don't have that vehicle the way we used to. So it's something that I'm worried about, democracy. And, I was telling Joel that I was just appointed co-chair of the Presidential Debates Commission, which to me is a very important, role in democracy. So I think for community, and this person is right, community foundations serve a very important role, if not solving an issue, highlighting an issue, okay? And that's when we say that we're more than grant makers. I just bought a building. I'm in real estate. If I weren't a lawyer, I'd be a real estate developer, okay? I love real estate, okay? So I bought a building for MALDEF, and now I bought a building for CCF. The first floor, 13,000 square feet, will be for convening space. Bringing people together, because we're more than grant makers, we're conveners, okay? And as you know, money doesn't solve problems. People bringing people together to talk about issues, that's what solves problems. So you have to create the infrastructure that allows for that. And to me, this building, convening spaces, and we had it where we were leasing, and it was a program of CCF. It was not infrastructure, it was a program of CCF. I spent $750,000 offering convening space to the community, because I think the role of bringing people together in a place like LA, 10 million people, 87 cities, the gathering place. We want CCF to be the gathering place of people to come together. So you have to think out of the box, and you have to go, you have to become a 21st century community foundation. And it's not easy. We've been around for 108 years. We were the third oldest community foundation in the country. I think it's a third of the vote. We're always arguing with Chicago, but Cleveland is first. Cleveland is first, and that was in April. Yeah. And then CCF and Chicago were in June, and we're always bickering over that, and then Boston, okay? but we're the third oldest community foundation in the country. So, we have deep roots in LA. And I would say that, Helene just left to run Spelman, but they just hired a woman in Chicago. But in California, it's Silicon Valley Community Foundation, San Francisco Community Foundation, CCF, and then coming up is San Diego Community Foundation. You have Marin Community Foundation. We have an association of community foundations in California. We have over 30 community foundations. Like the Orange County Community Foundation came out of CCF. The Ventura County Community Foundation came out of CCF. Bakersfield came out of CCF. The Inland Empire came out of CCF. As communities grew, the bird flew to serve those particular communities. So we're very cohesive in California, and that there's an association, there are meetings and all that other stuff. And that has helped a lot. And then the large community foundations get together once a year. And so there's a lot of collaboration. But I would say that the community foundations of today are very different than when I first joined CCF. They were little quiet, non-controversial, serve the donor type of community foundations. Now they're agents of change. And I think that's the direction that they're going into.
They're not all clearly there.
Well, no, but they're getting there. I mean, you gotta be patient.
No, there's progress. I'm not complaining. Yes.
Thanks so much for these insightful comments. I was planning on asking you about how you integrate community into your work, but I think you've already spoken to that a great deal. So I think instead, I'll ask about what you see as kind of the interplay between kind of American tax policy and philanthropy, in terms of, you discussed how 95% of funding for poor people comes from government, and that philanthropy only has a small slice. But I'm just doing reading for an econ class now about how our tax rates for the super wealthy people have decreased precipitously. Funding for social programs through the government has been starved, and maybe some of those folks give more money to philanthropy, but I know many don't. So I'm just curious if you could speak to the role of philanthropy in kind of America's tax structure generally, and maybe pros and cons of services directly through government as opposed to through philanthropy.
Well, first of all, I believe that it's the role of government, to support its people. And you are right, it's very controversial, the tax policies and the impact of tax policies on wealth. As you know, there are bills in Congress and there are bills in the state legislature in California about donor funds. And sort of if you put your money in a community foundation, you get a greater benefit than if you put it in a private foundation. And the question is, is it fair? Is it equitable? My sense of it is philanthropy is uniquely American. Philanthropy was founded in the United States. That's something we can export, through other parts of the world. But, from my perspective, I think that there's pros and cons to the tax policy. And yes, that is tax money that would have gone to the public coffers, that would have been distributed accordingly. But our tax policies are not fair. I mean, I'm a California resident, and I get what, 75 cents per dollar of the taxes the Californians pay? Politically represented, and I do have my views. We have 2 senators for, the 4th largest economy in the world. I don't want to blame anyone, but North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, they have, really, and in fact, we're proposing, changing, the House of Representatives for more equal representation. But I think there's some legitimacy, and in fact, one of the issues, on donor advice funds, we've stayed neutral. We have not gone, and I don't think, having worked in Washington, I don't think that any little change means the sky is falling. I mean, and I think sometimes philanthropy is to blame because it's reactive, it's not proactive. And that also needs to change. For private foundations, they give out 5% in minimum, And I can tell you, at the Rockefeller Foundation, they counted, the expensive infrastructure as part of the 5% of giving out the money. So would I be greatly upset if there's changes? No, I just work to implement them. And I think that philanthropy has to be at the table with solutions. We cannot just be no, 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 no. It's not going to work. And there's legitimacy to some of the concerns that are being expressed on, how wealthy people should be take advantage of the tax benefits of philanthropy, of charity.
Yeah, my question was I'm back here. Hi. My question is actually connected to the idea of how much money you give out. I know that what I've appreciated in your conversation is a deep focus on the interest of LA and what LA residents need. I'm curious how you align that with how much of the money you raise you give out every year. And other speakers have talked about models of philanthropy to hold on to the money, not into perpetuity, but so you can grow the amount of money you have to give. Other people spend down all of their money. How do you think about that for the foundation? What do you see as the sweet spot that is rooted in the priorities and the needs in the community of LA?
I will tell you that for me, that's an easy question. Because I started this conversation by telling you how much money we give out. Last year, we gave out $437 million. We raised 380-some thousand. So we raised less than what we gave out. On average, annually, CCF gives between 15 and 18% of its money out. Okay, and that's our donors, as well as our spending policy. So we're a churning machine. We churn a lot of money out, and actually we have in an informal policy where if our donors are not giving at least 5%, we nudge them the first year. Second year, we do more than nudge them. And then we have the power to take the money and give it out. So we're making very sure that our donors, and interestingly enough, the ones that we have to nudge are the ones that have the least amount of money. And what we tell them is, look, you got to give it away because we're charging you fees, okay? So your fund is being depleted by the fees we charge you. You might as well give it to a nonprofit. So I'm of the philosophy that, yes, endowments are very important, okay? And people, and I have argued with people that say, well, the need is so great today. 4 years ago, would someone have envisioned that we would have a pandemic? No. So the needs of our world and our society, unfortunately, will always be with us. Poor people will always be with us. But it's that balance, the balance that you have to, and we look at it, okay, grow the endowment, but the discretionary endowment, okay, grow the discretionary endowment for future needs while you're pushing the money out the door. And I think that that's the delicate balance. But, it's hard for some community foundations. I tell my friend, Nicole is the head of the Silicon Community Foundation. I think right now her corpus is like $12 billion. Hoo la la. She has no discretionary money. So she has to work very closely with her donors so that then she can direct the money. I work very closely with my donors to align them to what we already have, but I have discretionary money that we give out every year, about $40 million. That is just our discretionary money. And then we augment it with all of the donor money. So it's the delicate balance that you need to, understanding that both are very important.
Antonio, this is very exciting from my perspective. You are very exciting in the sense that what you accomplish by narrowing what you're going to do and by focusing on things which across a diverse LA, many people will do. And I love the way you do that. My question is your staff. How do you manage them as a group so that they are all the time aware of this conflict? Because many of the staff come with very strong ideas of what they want to do, and you're going to have to. So how do you organize your staff?
Well, first of all, I think it's part of the culture of an organization. And and you know, you would think CCF is a huge organization. We're all but 78 employees. Okay, so we're not a large organization. We meet constantly as an entire staff, and I have pushed and pushed the values of CCF. And you have to live those values, and you have to push them. And when, you know, people come to CCF, and that's the other challenge when you hire community people. You know, they come with their perceived notions. And I said, no. Here at CCF, this is your role. This is what you're here to do. And we have annual plans. And we discussed, you know, and our, how can I say this? We have a staff meeting once a month. And the staff meeting in itself is an educational meeting. The investment advisor or the investment person reports on the investment returns, because I want every single one of my staff to understand how they're getting paid. So how we did on, you know, on portfolio, how we're doing is really important. The budget person reports on where we are on the budget. The housing person reports on the latest, you know, sort of grants, the latest, you know, sort of changes. Because I tell staff that we are a big elephant, and their job is not to know their piece of the elephant. Their job is to know the entire elephant. You know, when we have board meetings, they have access to all the material we give our board. Whatever it is, it's all on the S drive. The challenge is finding it on the S drive. but it's there. And transparency is really important. You know, and my leadership team, you know, understand. What I try to do, and I've been mostly successful, sometimes not, is to create a culture of transparency. And I tell people, we're very lucky to have a job like this, because what we're working is with people who love people and love place. Because that's what community foundations, you know, you give to people and you give to place. And we want to educate the public about the needs of LA. So it takes a lot of work first to create the infrastructure. You know, like I have a whole department that raises money. I have a whole department, you know, who has the program. And this is what when I started, and it's a long story, but it's an important one. When I got there, my money people were, you know, out there trying to raise money. And I said, okay, you're salespeople. What are you selling? What's your product? I said, donor funds? That's not your product. They can go to Schwab and they get it cheaper. What are you selling? I said, what you're selling is what the housing people are doing. So you have to know what the hell the housing people are doing. And then I would tell the housing person, don't complain to me that you have just $2 million on your portfolio, because guess what? If you went and worked with the people raising the money, you would have a lot more money, because that's the product. You know, you break down barriers. So now and if the person came to me from development, fundraising, and said, you know, well, you know, I have this donor, you know, who's interested in this. And I said, well, have you connected them with so-and-so? No. Well, you know, that's the person who has the expertise. And so now there's a lot of, I've broken down the barriers. Because like I said, they're all fundraisers. They're all fundraisers. And we know what money came from where and what money came from whom and whatever, because they got to get it in their brain that collaboratively working together, we're going to raise a lot more money. So you have to build the infrastructure. And if somebody comes to me and said, I want to do this, and they know that the first question I'm going to ask is, did you check with so-and-so? Don't come to me until you checked with everyone impacted on the thing you want to do, because I will not approve it. So infrastructure, and that's the other thing too, you have to create solid infrastructure. And you have to have procedures that are flexible, but that, give parameters as to what you can do. I have spent a lot, one of the interesting things about, and I learned this at MALDEF, is if you don't have a good infrastructure, you can't do a damn thing. You have to, you got to build the train. And once you build the train, you can tell it where to go. But if you didn't build the tracks, the train ain't going to go nowhere. So, building the infrastructure of a solid organization. People like to be leaders, and that's wonderful. But if you're not a good manager, you're not going to be a good leader. And that's what's missing in philanthropy and nonprofits. Being good fiduciary managers. And then you can afford to be a leader.
Good. Now, I think Jacob has the microphone, so
Yep.
he has something to ask. This will be the last question.
Well, thank you so much. This is a personal question, not from the chat, but I wanted to ask about the parallel you drew between philanthropy and venture capital, because I found that fascinating. I read somewhere that in terms of venture capital, only I think around 2% goes to women. So I wanted to ask, kind of thinking about that parallel, where do you see the opportunities and challenges for women in the philanthropy space? Thank you.
Well, actually, philanthropy is majority women. The question is not that they're not in women, they're not in leadership positions. Okay, so, I would say 70% of philanthropy is women, but the leadership is different. So the way I look at it is, if you run a community foundation, I can only speak of this, you got to look at the table, your table. And I always make sure who's sitting at that table. On my board, I make no bones about it. How many women, how many Asians, how many Latino, how many African Americans, LGBTQ. Is the table representative of the place? And I focus on my staff too. I have a bunch of troublemaking staffers from you name it, Persians, Armenians, you name it, I have them, okay? And the other thing too is you gotta hire smart, questioning people. Philanthropy tends to hire very nice people, and I call it phony nice. Well, it's true. And I guess being a civil rights lawyer and a lawyer, you solve problems to talking through issues. So for me, it's who's at the table. And if they're not at the table, then they got to be at the table. And I think I have, now it's very diverse, but I've always had one of the most diverse. And in fact, of the 19 years that I've been there and chair served for 2 years, more than half have been women, including Joel's best friend, Jane Eisner. Okay? So, we're very careful about the presentation of who we are. We can't say we're LA if my staff doesn't represent LA. And I think that in philanthropy, you have to do that. It's the same thing with corporate America. And it's not, because I'm so old, I used to be the only Hispanic, okay? The only Hispanic here, the only Hispanic there. One person doesn't make change. 2 people maybe starts it, but it doesn't change the culture. And we all look at the world with different lenses, and we all bring unique things through our life experience. And that's what the collective is. It's the life experience that are very different from ours. And I think people tend to forget how important that is. It's not just because, I'm Latina and I'm going to sit at the table and rest on my laurels of being the Hispanic, or now they call me Latina. You know, in reality, I'm a Chicana, okay? And if you people don't know politics, I'm a troublemaking Chicana, okay? From East LA. So, and that's what I tell people. I said, I might appear really, really nice. I said, but don't poke me. I grew up in the roughest projects in LA. And that will come out if it needs to come out. You know, it's, I've been so lucky and so fortunate in the jobs that I've had. And I think if you're going into philanthropy, I would say remember 3 things. 1, it's not your money, unless it's your money. 2, you gotta do good. You gotta do good. And you have to face the issues frontally and right on. No sugarcoating of the issues. Because I think that sometimes, you know, we minimize how difficult it is to solve the problems of poverty. And they're hard. They're really hard. And finally, you have to learn to say no. Because as much money as I have, or CCF, we end up saying no to most things. And feel comfortable knowing that if you believe you've done the best you can, that's all you can hope for. And being in philanthropy, if you really are going to be a good philanthropist, the job is damn hard.
That's wonderful, Antonia. Before I finally thank you, let me say that, just point out that we have, this is the last FIRG session of this semester. We have a good lineup for the spring, starting with Carol Stern, who is the president of the Walton Family Foundation, followed by Rip Rapson, president of the Kresge Foundation, Ginny Esposito, who founded the National Center for Family Philanthropy, John Palfrey, president of the MacArthur Foundation, and Barbara Pickauer, the elusive but extraordinarily impressive head of the JPB Foundation. So it's really an all-star group coming in, and I hope that you all make the dates will be circulated to you by Cassie in time before the start of the semester. Well, I just want to say that, you know, I've heard a lot of community foundation and private foundation speeches. This one has been the most entrancing. While I've known of some of the things that Antonia said today beforehand, I've seen them in a new light. And I do congratulate you again. I think I said this to you when I met you the first time. It's still true. The truth of the matter is the creativity which you bring, the honesty with which you approach the job, the integrity, the creativity which you brought to creating the organization that will do what a community foundation really has to do are all very impressive. And you're an eloquent spokesperson for that. And so I hope you'll come back and visit us again. And if you bring Michael and Jane with you, that would be fine too.